Giving someone a jail sentence sent a message to the people that I think the establishment was really most intent on. I don't think they really minded hippies running around the streets with flowers in their teeth. I don't think they liked it very much, but there was no harm in that. I don't really think they minded drugs very much because the drugs were all pretty benign. If black people rose up, who knew? That opened up another door, and that's what Michael really came up against.
Trinidad should be a great place for a boy to grow up. But for me, it was all ruined by my mother's hang-up about color. She didn't want me doing anything the black boys did. If I really wanted to have a good time, I had to do it behind her back.
Michael de Freitas, I knew him as Michael de Freitas back home, right? His mom, I knew his mom by selling, she used to sell on the street. She used to sell a sweet we call back home tulum. It made of molasses and coconut and, Michael's mother was selling the tulum. She was the tulum selling lady, a very black lady. She was black as the tulum.
What I remember of Michael's mother, she was dark-skinned, darker than Michael was. And she would refer to Michael as a white man's child. Remember his mom saying, don't interfere with the white man's child, because, he would have had that kind of protection of color. We did have that kind of color perspective, with white being at the top and black being at the bottom. That was a kind of a passport to betterment if you were light-skinned or had a white family.
White is pretty, black ugly. That's what my mother used to tell me when I was a little boy in Trinidad. She was from Barbados, a descendant of slaves, and grew up in that peculiarly Barbadian atmosphere where all the blacks are trying desperately to be English. To my mother, who was one of the blackest people I knew, the best people in the world were white. That's certainly one of the reasons she lived with my father, a Portuguese merchant she met when she moved to Trinidad.
Music is on the soft tropic air. Calypso, that rhythmic singing ballad, uniquely Trinidad's own. Spontaneous and unwritten, its witty lyrics carry important messages or give barbed comment on people and events.
Your father is an African, your mother may be Norwegian. You pass me, you wouldn't say goodnight, feeling you were really white. Your skin may be a little pink, and that's the reason why you think that the complexion of your face can hide you from the Negro race. No, you can never get away from the fact, if you're not white, you considered black.
If you're told that one of the reasons why it was legitimate to enslave black people is because, we are less than human, no intelligence, lots of brawn and no brain, and the rest of it, that sinks into your consciousness. You go to church in an all-black country, for Christ's sake, and you're looking up at a white Christ on a cross. And all the effigies, all the statues around you, the Virgin Mary is white. The child Jesus is white. Everybody is white. The angels are white. And you think, oh my God, there's no place in heaven for black people. You know what I mean?
If you're not white, you consider black.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
When we came to this country, we were not traveling to a foreign country. We were taught, I was taught when I was a young man, that my country, Trinidad, was an extension of this one. We were weaned on the concept of the empire and the mother country, and we firmly believe this. No more loyal subjects had the king or queen ever had. When I was a young boy, I stood in 90 degrees of sun, day after day, and sang all kind of silly things like God Save the Queen, Land of Hope and Glory, Britannia Rule the Waves, with the greatest of fervor, and believed every word of it. To come here and discover that we weren't wanted has been a very shattering blow. Many people in this country who think that we are very hateful are so wrong. It's not a matter of hate that our people are feeling towards the people of this country, but a very simple emotion like that of a rejected love.
There were two cultures fighting it out in him. I mean, he really did have devils, you know, they say that people have got demons, and well, Michael had demons, he certainly did. He felt conflicted. I mean, you could almost see a line drawn down the center of him sometimes. I mean, and he just didn't know which side he belonged on.
The Black House is a self-help community project, a center of our own where we could meet, talk, laugh, dance, argue, a place to realize our very dreams.
John was flirting with the avant-garde and with radical politics at that time. So when Michael made his pitch for giving money for the Black House, John and Yoko decided they would cut their hair. Michael could auction it, and then he would get some money.
I don't want to sound unkind, but don't you think that this may have been construed as just another Lennon stunt?
Well, we tried to keep it quiet. I don't care. It came useful for this, you know.
Yes.
I was obsessed with photography, and I knew I wanted to be a photographer. You'd literally just go out walking around with your camera, you know, looking for pictures. And so I ventured from my neighborhood, which was Hackney, suddenly came across this building called the Black House. And I sort of wandered in. Was amazed, you know, my sort of adventure really began there, really. He had like a sort of games room. It had rooms where for young black kids, if they had nowhere to live, male or female, they could have a shelter. It had a kitchen, so if you had nothing to eat, you could go there and get food. It had a rehearsal room if you're in a band. I found sort of like-minded people there. There was sort of like a little creative force there. Once I found that, it became my sort of central point where I would sort of go to all the time. Well, the revelation was a history which I never knew existed. I mean, I knew everything about British history, you know, William the Conqueror, I know, you know, etc. 1066, I knew the lot, you know, because that's what I was taught. But I never knew that we had a history. I didn't know about Africa. At the library and stuff, you came across books that was teaching of the heritage and the history of Africa and what Africa contributed to the world as such. So for me, it would just open my eyes.
The educational system will have to be reoriented. People like Cecil Rhodes will no longer be considered as great heroes and philanthropists, but they'll have to be termed as murderers and plunderers, which may be totally unsuitable to a European mind, but it is the kind of thing which will have to take place within a black consciousness.
Michael was the kind of guy that he was always patrolling around. He was always looking for new faces, new people that he felt could be useful in many ways. He saw him at the camera. I think he realized, well, this could be useful, you know. With this set of contacts here, this is taken in the Black House. And I was just walking through the building and I came across this kid with this gun and the balaclava. And I took these images and thought nothing more of it. But this image has now become very, very provocative in many, many ways in terms of what it could stand for. It's a timeless image because in some ways what was trying to project is sort of like that vision of from America with Malcolm X by the window when it was like by any means necessary. It's violent without violence. It's the possibility of the violence. It's a very violent photograph, but without any blood or whatever. It's just the possibility of what can happen. There are certain people, certain animals that you just need to look at them and you just know you don't want to mess with that one. You know, he had that presence. You know, he'd been through the mills and it was written all over him. He was a very, very presentable person, very gentle person when he presented himself, but underneath it, you just knew, no, you just don't want to mess with that man.
I teach my children to fight. This is one of the first lessons I give my children because I feel it is necessary in this world, which is very vicious towards young people, so they may learn how to defend themselves. I teach them how to use wit because inside of this society, one has to survive by their wits. If one is black, you got to be twice as good as the next man. So one has to work twice as hard to be that. That's the way the society is. That's a reality. There's no such thing like equal opportunity. That's bullshit. I'm successful because I'm prepared to work twice as hard and I'm prepared to be twice as ruthless as anyone else.
What Michael is capable of doing is bringing it down, the intellectual thing, to a very basic level. And the basic level is to subject you to a bit of violence. Kind of ritualistic violence in which you're shown to be made of clay. You weren't as all-powerful as you may have been seen before. But I think it's something that he encountered with Rachman and other underworld figures. They were doing jobs for people, little jobs, cleaning windows and that kind of stuff. And one guy, unfortunately, didn't pay. And Michael wanted to teach him a lesson that he couldn't do these things to black people. That they had suffered in slavery and suffered during colonialism. And they discriminated against you in Britain, and now he's trying to make a decent living, and the guy was didn't want to pay. So the let's have made the guy bark like a dog, whilst on his all fours on the ground. And whilst he was barking, he was being kicked or hit by members of the group.
Some of the black activist movement felt a sense of betrayal because even though we held concerns or we were unsure about the pathway that he was undertaking. The underlying element of all of that was a sense of disbelief that this can be genuine, and a sense that some kind of foreboding that something will not come out right on this.
Although he claimed to be leading a movement, I didn't consider that he really had an understanding of what collective action is about. There's a difference between collective action, in which people are empowered or empower themselves. If there was a fault line in the whole Michael de Freitas project, for me, I believe that that is what it was. There's a difference between leadership and demagoguery.
Trinidad, March 1970. Politics and economics both are going through a period of agonizing upheaval. Political thoughts and ideologies in the Caribbean are developing with the progress into the independent way of life. Old patterns of thought are changing, and the old heroes are toppling from their colonial pedestals.
Our heroes at that time were people like Sir Francis Drake, Sir Walter Raleigh, Mary Queen of Scots, Queen Elizabeth I, and all the rest of these people. Nowadays, people tend to look for a different type of expression, a different type of hero. They expect their hero to look like them. They want their heroes to be Stokely Carmichael, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, myself, and a lot of other people like us.
I only met Malik once in my life. I was a young reporter in TTT, Trinidad and Tobago Television at the time. When he came back to Trinidad, he was in the news a lot, and especially when John Lennon and Yoko Ono visited, and that when Muhammad Ali had come to Trinidad, Malik was very involved in some way with Ali's visit. That created big news in Trinidad and Tobago. And Malik always tried to get himself in the news, because I think he wanted to be portrayed as this Black Power leader, civil rights leader akin to Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael. The name Rachman was well known as a slumlord and so forth. And the fact that there was this Trinidadian in London who was involved with him. Most Trinidadians knew that Malik was a henchman for the British slumlord Peter Rachman and nothing else.
In letters to London, Malik let it be known that if he got the unreserved support of an international group of men and women, he just might decide to lead a political move in Trinidad. They suggested to Malik that a small party of tacticians, as they called them, would fly out to Trinidad, provided a sponsor could be found, to consult him on the chances of founding in the hills, near Port of Spain, the first university of the alternative. It would be the start, they felt, of something of world significance, the seat and spring of a worldwide counterculture.
The people in the commune were, first of all, Malik, of course. He was the main man. Then there was Hakim Jamal and Gaylan Benson, who were living there, and Joseph Skerritt.
Joe Skerritt was a wide-eyed little youngster, as we all were with people who had come from abroad. If you had come from America, or come from Canada, or come from the UK, it was a big thing. And that's what happened with him and Michael. Oh, look, it's a fella, they come from London, and yeah, he's a Black Power leader. And he would have been influenced by that whole thing.
Hakim Jamal and Gaylan Benson used to be seen around Arima quite a bit. Nobody knew the connection with Malik. There was this tall black man, always dressed in these long dashikis, walking with this white woman who was also dressed in some kind of dashiki normally. She had become a hippie-type person and had gone away from the father and that style of living.
Yeah, it was a total free spirit. She always felt sorry for the underdog. She was a very kind sort of person. She never liked my father, mostly to do with my mother, I think. She was desperate to get away from home. He was a great womanizer and spent all the money. My mother sort of just conformed and shut up, you know, instead of getting a divorce like she should have done. She just, you know, grinned and bared it, so to speak.
What would have been a path for Gail?
Well, she could have become a debutante. She was definitely not a suitable candidate for become a deb, I don't think. She was sort of more hippie, you know, sort of wear a pair of jeans. That was more her style than being all dolled up and going to a posh ball. She wanted to take her languages seriously. She went off to Argentina to better her Spanish. And then she came back, and that is when she met Hakim Jamal.
When the house burnt down, and this was in the night, massive fire in Arima. And when we found out what it was, we realized it was the Mailik home where this commune had been set up. And I spoke with the fire officer who had been in charge on the night of the fire. And he said to me in his entire career, he had never seen a house of that magnitude burn flat in such a short space of time. He said it was clearly not an accidental fire. It was clearly something set by an expert. The next thing, well, the police, who had always suspected Mailik of being involved with arms and drugs and that sort of thing, were on the premises looking around to see if they would find anything. They found nothing in the house. So after the police had gone around all through the property for about 2 or 3 days, they were getting ready to leave. They decided they would try to dig up a little to see if there was anything hidden there. They were thinking they might find some drugs or some guns or something of the sort. And when they dug, all of a sudden they saw a hand staring at them. And that is when all hell broke loose.
Last year, yes, 2021.
The news editor came in to my office and he said, we've just had a piece on from Reuters saying they found a body in the garden of this house that, where Michael X is living. At that time, we were nervous about race and the new law, how to operate within it. And they weren't happy about Michael X either. Is he good? Is he bad? What the hell is he? They didn't really know. And then came the second body. And he said, well, there are 2 bodies now, and one of them is of a woman, middle-class English woman called Gail Benson. Perhaps we should take a closer look.
4 of us went out to dinner somewhere in Fulham Road somewhere. We came back, it was probably about 10 at night or 9:30, something like that. Phone rings, and it was a reporter saying, we've had a report that, this is to my mother, that your daughter's been found dead. Well, my mother was, you know, pretty devastated, you know, she was in shock, and I mean, it was a happy occasion, the dinner party we had together, and then to come back to that news, it must have been dreadful for her. I can't describe really how awful it was for her, really. Didn't hear anything from her when she went off the final time until we were, you know, we were informed by a reporter that she'd been found dead. Every single newspaper for the whole 2 or 3 weeks was nothing but this. And the daughter of an MP, you know, that's what they were playing at, not so much her personality or what she was doing. It was full of all that stuff.
So the next thing I know is I'm in Georgetown, Guyana, trying to find Michael X, who's on the run.
In Guyana, Malik now decided to run for it. He headed for the bauxite town of Linden, the last outpost before the jungle and Brazil.
We were hot on his heels, not far behind him.
He knew that if he could reach the river, he might be able to persuade the local Amerindian tribesmen to guide him across the Guyana border to Brazil. But that was a long way off.
And there's quite a lot of wildlife in that area, and big game hunting goes on. And we were walking along part of it, and suddenly there's this funny coughing sound, and this superb-looking black leopard leaps from one side of the forest to the other, across the track in front of us, in one huge black flash like that. And I thought to myself, blimey, this guy would probably get eaten before he gets to the Essequibo River. And how's he going to escape? The madness of it just struck me. He was desperate. He was a desperate man, wasn't he? He'd come across this woodman's shack in the middle of the bush. And there's this old guy, Victor Bishop, who was taken by surprise that Michael X suddenly arrived. And he was quite scared.
What did he say to you when he first met you?
When he first met me, he told me that thousands of police is after him, and he's Malik. And he's hungry. I get up and prepare some tea for him.
Make your tea for him?
Yes, and some food I give him too.
You were frightened something might happen to you?
Yeah.
Before he settled down to sleep, Malik told Mr. Bishop that he'd been let down by black people and that he wanted to start a new life with the Amerindians, people he could trust.
During the night, the police closed in, and at dawn, they woke him up by the scruff of the neck, arrested him.
Malik was taken off to the Royal Jail in Port of Spain to join his associates already in custody.
On the day of the trial, it was a huge story. Hundreds and hundreds of people had come out. Street vendors and people selling all kinds of wares and tumblers and jugglers, and it's just like carnival outside the court. And inside the court, it was just like the Old Bailey, but black. All the lawyers in wigs.
Malik was brought to trial at the Port of Spain Assizes, accused with 3 others of murdering Joseph Skerrett. In this case, police thought the eyewitness evidence against him conclusive. They wanted the judge to try Gail Benson's murders separately. He agreed.
The prosecutor was Carl Hudson Phillips, who was the sitting Attorney General in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, many legal minds in Trinidad and Tobago have pointed out that that was a very unusual move for a sitting Attorney General to prosecute a murder case. He insisted that he was going, and nobody else was going to do it.
The problem for Michael X in the trial was that he had problems finding someone to represent him. He had to go to St. Lucia to find a lawyer. Kenneth Foster, he didn't know anything about the case. He hadn't been briefed. He had problems bringing in an assistant, and they were hindering him in lots of ways, you know. I felt sorry for him.
The prosecution had already described a cold-blooded execution by Mailik.
The Crown says this body is that of the very Joseph Skerrett, and that on that day, this 8th of February, unwittingly, Joseph Skerrett was veritably digging his own grave.
The theory is that Mailik had ordered Skerrett to to go and attack some police station to try to get some guns or something of the sort. And Skerrett had refused to do it. And Mailik didn't decide he wasn't accepting that. You must not refuse his orders. And Mailik himself chopped him in his neck and killed him and dumped him in the hole. The courtroom was silent when the verdict came given and sentence was being pronounced. Evan Rees had a deep voice, and you heard this voice ringing out, and his words remain with me to this day. He said, "Michael Abdul Mailik, it is the sentence of this court that you be taken from here to a place to be appointed. And on a date to be appointed, you will be hung by the neck until you are dead. And may the Lord have mercy on your soul." I felt that it was emotionally draining to listen to that, to listen to a man actually being sentenced to death. I mean, it's the only time I've experienced anything like that. It was the most heart-wrenching thing to hear, you know? I don't think I'll ever forget that as long as I live.
In the 4 weeks it took to return a guilty verdict in the Skerrett case, the macabre goings-on at Christina Gardens had become the talk of Trinidad, with people more curious than ever to know why Gail Benson died. But now that case may be dropped because of insufficient evidence. Anyway, the police already have their man.
He somehow thought he would get away with it. I could never understand that. Even when he was taken back to jail, he still thought he was going to get off somehow, magically.
My brother arranged some sort of cremation by a river somewhere in Trinidad. Well, just so you sometimes just think back and something reminds you about it. You know, it's difficult to put into words. Well, you're just reminded by small things about what happened. I've been rather resistant to it, talking about it.
Why is that?
Well, who wants, you know, it's just, I don't want to be reminded of it. Well, it's very difficult. All this happened 50 years ago. I'm 85 now, so this will probably be the last time I'll talk about it, I should imagine.
Somebody got in touch with me on behalf of the John Lennon
team. And I was called to ask if I would represent Michael in as best I could in whatever way we could to save his life. And John Lennon agreed to provide a little bit of money and one of his pianos to help pay our fees. But he wanted us to go and see Michael in Trinidad on death row. There's another young lawyer in London, Jeff Robertson, and I approached him to see if he would represent Michael, and he happily agreed to work with me on Michael's case.
As far as I was concerned, guilty or innocent, it was not appropriate to hang him. I arrived in Trinidad and I managed to sit with him on death row for about a week, discussing how to take legal steps that would prevent the death penalty from being carried out. Michael X was well aware of what was coming. They were horrifying places because the former colonial countries in the Caribbean had maintained all the obscene ritual of the British execution.
I, Michael Abdul Mailik, make oath and say as follows. Since I have been in the condemned cell, there have been 5 executions. On Thursdays between the hours of 2 and 4, a senior prison officer would pace up and down and stop at the cell of the person who is to be hanged on the following Tuesday.
Hope alternates with despair in a psychological roller coaster for the condemned man. In Trinidad, the British had vouchsafed them a constitution that expressly reserved their right to hang people convicted of murder. But it also gave them a Bill of Rights, which expressly banned torture. And the eureka moment as we sat in death row, was that death row is a place of mental torture.
All the prisoners join in the wake for their short-lived brother, but he cannot be touched or even kissed by his wife or mother or close relatives. There is a great weeping and screaming. At 5:30, the morning of execution, he is dressed in a white shirt. His hands are strapped behind his back. A white hood is put over his head. He is then executed, and the flying of the trap is distinctly heard by the other men. It is a cruel and unusual treatment and punishment, and contrary to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Sworn the 31st day of January, 1974, Michael Abdul Mailik.
So I actually said to Michael, we could argue that you've been subjected to a form of mental torture, which is contrary to the Constitution, and means that your sentence of death has to be commuted. Now, I'll never forget, Michael put his finger to his lips like this. He said, listen, just listen. And I did listen, and you could have heard a pin drop. All those prisoners were straining to listen to the legal advice I was giving. And he said to me, This place is always full of noise, and these people are so desperate that they will stop and listen to everything you say. And he said to me, so make that argument. Make it for them, not for me, because they're going to hang me, whatever the law is. I come back to London. I make the argument. It got very short shrift before Lord Diplock, who said the delay is his own fault for appealing. But it's every person's right to appeal, so that's not an argument at all.
This memo is dated the 13th of May. This is the exact date on which the Privy Council took the decision to authorise the execution of Michael X, which discusses how Michael X's execution is going to be discussed in the media. The argument that they settle on is an argument about decolonisation. What they're arguing is that because Trinidad and Tobago is now a newly sovereign and newly independent state, that the British government needs to respect that independence. And therefore, that the role of the Privy Council is simply to rubber stamp the decisions made by judges in Trinidad. So I think what decolonisation allows the British government to do is to have its cake and eat it. They want Michael X dead, and they want to be absolved of responsibility.
Tradition in Trinidad and Tobago from time immemorial was that at 4 o'clock Thursday afternoon, the warrant of execution will be read to the prisoner. And the following Tuesday morning at 7 o'clock, the prisoner will be executed. In Malik's case, however, when the final documentation came back, decided they wanted him out of the way immediately. The warrant was read to Malik in his cell at the Port of Spain prison. And at 7 o'clock on the Friday morning, Malik was hanged.
As they wanted to be rid of Michael, he was a nuisance, a thorn in their side of the deepest kind. They'd clearly rushed to execution because they knew that we were planning another appeal.
Nothing we could do about it. You cannot appear for a corpse. I didn't, of course, realize at the time what would emerge from that meeting with Michael in the Royal Jail. I mean, there is a view expressed by the late Darcus Howe that Michael didn't change anything for anybody, but I think his life certainly had that element that was worthwhile and which did, in time, lead to change.
Whatever that tale was a different Michael than the Michael I knew. Something changed, and not for the better. And so that's a sad ending.
I would struggle to say what went wrong with Michael, but when you have that over-elevated sense of who you are, what you are, and you're above everybody else, then hubris takes place, and then you act in a way in which the consequences always becomes inevitable.
He was a bloody good hustler. If only he had done it in a way that benefited our community. That would have been incredible. Just imagine for a minute what he could have achieved on behalf of our community.
She believed to be poor was to be closer to Jesus, yet she gave more money to the Vatican Bank than some entire countries. Mother Teresa for the Love of God, on demand from Sky Documentaries.